Hello, Richard Tromans again at Artificial Lawyer. Today we're examining a very interesting piece of data that came from a survey from Juro, the legal tech company. The data was that 67% approximately of in-house lawyers are doing work that they believe is effectively low-value process work. I thought this was a fascinating finding, and we'd be very lucky to get Richard Mabey, who is the founder and CEO of the company, to tell us a little bit more about this and why that is the case. Hi, Richard. Good to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Richard.
And actually, first of all, did I get that right? It's 67%? What is the exact statistic?
Yeah, so it was. So we surveyed around 35 tech GCs. So these were legal leaders in tech companies, and the question that was asked them is to list your priorities. And one of those concerns that was cited was, I feel buried in low value work, and two-thirds, so just over two-thirds of the respondents said yes to that, and then cited that as the top problem that they were grappling with.
Gotcha. Okay, fair enough. And just briefly, and we can maybe pick this up at the end, but just very, very quickly, what does Juro do?
So we're end-to-end contract collaboration platform. So we work with businesses to power the end-to-end process of generating through to renewing legal contracts. And we do that in a custom in-browser editor, among other things.
Gotcha. Okay, so effectively, this is feedback from your client base, effectively.
It was more or less, I mean, some clients, but mostly actually the survey came from non-clients, if you like,
Cool.
so people in our community of tech GCs.
Okay, awesome. All right. Well, look, let's get into this then. So, two-thirds of in-house lawyers, relatively highly paid people, very intelligent people, people who've worked very hard to get where they are doing work that you might say implicitly they shouldn't be doing. Is that? I mean, to me, that seems like madness.
I think it's an astonishing stat. I mean, when we were thinking about this, the first thing we asked ourselves was, is this a problem specific to in-house lawyers, or is this just an endemic problem in the world, a problem with people that either through poor prioritization or poor workflow that people are actually focusing their time on the wrong thing? And I think, I mean, there's certain economic pressures that I think don't help. So when you have this slightly inflammable mixture of budget constraints, the fact you're in a tech scale up, it's growing very fast, the fact that you have a very small legal team, inevitably there's going to be a whole lot of reactive firefighting type work. And, there just isn't anyone to do a lot of the administrative stuff. So if you're billing external counsel, you don't have a billing team to deal with that. It's you who has to do the work. So I think there's a certain amount of pressure, which is, economic. But I think ultimately, like when we have conversations with GCs, we often just hear about a problem of workflow, a problem of task management and prioritization. And I think it is certainly compounded by the organizations they're in, but it's not a problem, I think, that is purely one of automation and the things that we tend to write about.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting that you said that point. Maybe it's just a people problem in general. I mean, I thought it was very interesting. So, perhaps, if we look at the sort of the pyramid of labor, effectively what we're saying is that everybody at all stages, from the, super high value professionals, etc., everybody is effectively wasting a ton of time. And in-house lawyers and lawyers in private practice, because you yourself were a lawyer in a private practice law firm, we're all wasting a ton of time. Or is it that in fact in-house lawyers in particular are wasting a lot of their time?
Well, I think like one analogy I tend to look at is software engineering, right? So if you're a team of software engineering, a lot of the work that gets done, a lot of the thinking that gets done in that particular part of the world is around how to work in a really efficient way. Right, so you have really, relatively sophisticated setups, usually in tech teams, agile working, all of these sort of buzzwords, Scrum methodologies. But at minimum, you're using a Kanban board to track tasks, right? Or you are thinking really hard about whether or not to ship this feature or that feature. So there's a whole sort of project management stream that happens in software engineering, and of course, it happens in lots of other kind of areas. I think, thinking back to my time in private practice, there was a lot of being on email and messing around in Microsoft Word documents, which, albeit both of those things powerful tools, they're not really defined workflows. So we have seen cases where, the tech legal teams will adopt that, inverted commas, agile way of working, and it can help if they're using Juro for task tracking or whatever it may be. But I think there's still an awful lot of, I'm on my desktop, I'm editing a Microsoft Word document, I'm saving it as a version, I'm running a red line of it, I'm attaching it to an email, I'm sending it out. Someone's now emailed me something else saying it's urgent. So I think certainly in that working practice, I think people are trying to break away to do something more effective. But the situation, doesn't help. And of course, everyone's telling you things are urgent, right? If you've been a lawyer, everything's always, this is the most urgent thing, and it often tends not to be. So it is genuinely a hard situation. But I think I do think kind of these legal professionals are catching up somewhat with processes of working which have been adopted by other departments, some time ago.
So just kind of reading between the lines, it's not purely a tech solution, although tech obviously is going to help because it's going to sort of grease the wheels of those processes, but it's getting those processes in place in the first instance, really, isn't it? It's I guess it, for me, as an outsider, way the whole legal world seems to work still in many cases is that everything begins from scratch. Everything is a whole new problem, and of course it very rarely is. It's always got elements related to others, and if anything has been done more than twice, you can model it, you can structure it, you can project manage and so forth, and you can start to build systems and so forth. And as you were saying, talking about software engineering or any other departments in a large company, this is what they do, isn't it? They bring in consultants who say, right, this is very silly, we can make this much more efficient, and bang bang bang, and takes a couple of iterations, but they get there. In law, it's just like, immovable object, unstoppable force, bang. I mean, I guess the simple question is just why? Why is it so ridiculously difficult to reform this particular department of a company?
Yeah, and I think, it's something you've written about quite a lot, Richard, right? The industrialization of the legal services industry, which is that quite a lot of legal work can be productized. Some is obviously very bespoke, but there's a huge volume of stuff that can be productized and brought into a conveyor belt of work, frankly, which is going to be much more efficient than the craftsman or the artisan who's creating this thing every time from scratch. Yeah, so part of it, I do believe, is a tech problem, which is, if you look at the level of automation across the industry, it is still relatively low as an industry. And I guess, we think again back to this sort of task prioritization stuff. If you drew the absolute standard kind of cookie cutter matrix of urgent, non-urgent, important, not important, you've got probably some errors happening there because, well, it's happening with everyone, not just in-house lawyers. But then, you could think about it another way, which is high complexity task, low complexity task, high volume, low volume, right? And you could draw a kind of quadrant like that, where the sort of high volume, low complexity tasks, of which there are a lot, and I think that's what the survey reflects, being buried in the endless repetition of these tasks. Ultimately, you can't really solve that with increased headcount because you're likely not to get budget to scale the legal team in a linear fashion with the growth of a tech company. So you're going to be limited in resource. So you've got to do something else. And that doesn't have to be technology, right? It could just be better process. It could be, better training, whatever it is. But certainly in automation of the repetitive tasks, the billing tasks, the contract review tasks, there's a lot that can be done to help you scale. And I think it's still the penetration of automation technologies in in-house legal teams is relatively small. And in the survey, for example, I think another stat was 77% of these legal counsel are just creating and marking up documents in Microsoft Word, which is unusual as a department. It's just it just doesn't tend to happen that people are working on desktop technologies, often in tech companies.
And in tech companies. Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? And the sort of division of labor is, I think, a particular problem in the legal sphere. So if you have these quasi-legal tasks where you need a smidgen of legal expertise to do them, it's a real problem because I guess the in-house legal team goes, well, shall we, let's outsource this. But it's kind of like it's not like a big enough and continuous job or uniform enough job to send to Elevate or a process focused legal services business. Or they go, well, let's send it to Clifford Chance or Freshfields or whatever. We're like, no, that's not going to work. It's going to cost us an arm and a leg, and it's not what they don't really do that kind of stuff anyway. And they think, well, let's send it over to Bob's department, in procurement or whatever. They're like, well, no, they don't really do it, so you're just left with this steaming pile of of stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not really legal work, and it's not really just completely sort of flavorless admin that you can just bung out to anybody, you know. And that's what for me, that's if we could just, as a starting point, if we can just crack that problem, that would be good progress.
And I do think that's reflected by what we see. So, a classic example might be in the case of contracts. Things like tracking key dates in contracts quite often will fall on the legal team, but actually it really has very, very little to do with legal, right? It should be procurement's job or someone else's job, commercial person's job. That does often happen, that work is sort of lumped on legal because it sort of sounds legal, right? It's something to do with contract.
Exactly. There's, as I think you just tweeted about it, if it's a contract, it's legal. It's like, well, not really.
I was writing on Ken Adams' blog today about this, but yeah, and actually what I said on the blog, I think is part of the solution, which is I don't think you need to be a lawyer to negotiate a contract. Maybe in 0.1% of cases you need legal advice, but these are just economic instruments. If the legal team can create a simple playbook for you, why can't people who have responsibility for the economic impact of the contract actually do some of the inverted commas legal work? Because mostly it's not legal work. The amount of time, even when I was at Freshfields, the amount of time we spent thinking about the legal formalities of a contract versus the commercial reality of doing some really complex M&A deal is very small. And I think in in-house legal teams, we often think about legal work as being, instructing Freshfields or Slaughter and May on a massive project. But actually the reality is it's a huge volume of churn work, and someone's got to do it. So I'm a bit of an extremist in this regard. I think the business should be doing some of that work themselves, and that of course would reduce the low value tasks.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's division of labor. Just read Adam Smith. We haven't come very far in 100 years, or more than that, 200 years. I'm sure we both agree with each other on this. It does matter. But to anyone who's listening and thinks, well, who cares? It doesn't really matter, really, does it? Come on. What would you say to them if they said, hey, who cares?
So I would say, well, one is, we produced this webinar last week with 3 tech GCs who I think would be strongly opposed to that premise. Mm-hmm. So it was Carolyn at Trustpilot, Francesca on Fido, and James at Monzo. And I think that these examples we find where people are just not accepting this situation, right? Which is, yes, there's loads of low value work. That's a problem, but I'm going to solve the problem. And sometimes they'll solve it with automation and technology. Sometimes they'll solve it with playbooks. At Monzo, every time we have James Sullivan on, he always tells people not to use newfangled software like Juro, but to use what you have and create really simple automations. I think you find these legal leaders who are actually getting through that, and it's ridiculously hard, right? Because every time you ask for a new person in your legal team, the CFO says no. Every time you ask for 20 grand to implement legal tech, the CFO says no. Somehow you've got to kind of muddle through that. So I think the premise is all about a problem, but all of these problems are eminently solvable, and they're solvable with the right leadership, the right attitude and, of course, the right processes and technologies to make it happen.
No, definitely. Oh, and last couple of things. I mean, a lot of has been said. A lot of things have been said about COVID and digitization, and once you're forced to be remote, you become more digital. That effectively then becomes kind of like a gateway drug to the hardcore stuff, like automation and self-serve contract development, all that kind of stuff. And on top of that, we then have this possibility of what we saw in 2008, 2009, which triggered the phrase the new normal for legal, where GCs started saying, hey, I'm not paying that bill because the CFO was standing behind them carrying an axe, kind of thing. And everyone freaked out and went, whoa, it's the new normal. Clients are saying no. Do you get the feeling that's happening now? That we're having like kind of a new normal 2.0, that and this is the thing that actually will activate the adoption of technology, because at the end of the day, these are businesses. They're trying to reduce wasted expenditure.
So I think yes, is the answer. I think it'll be slower than we think, because it usually is. So I remember, I think was it Richard Susskind did a lecture called in the beginning of 1990s called "The 90s: The Era of Change for Legal Services," and he was right, but just 2 decades out. So I think it will be slow in that regard. And of course, we see news stories, right? Linklaters promising this, new world of remote working and this paradise of, I think, Mishcon de Reya with unlimited holidays and things like that. That stuff is changing, which is great. I think the one thing I really do believe that we are already seeing is a shift to a more human-centric way of working for legal teams. And I think this is a really fascinating shift, where the most forward-looking law firms and the most effective in-house legal departments are realizing that the assets that they have is human capital. And if they really want the smartest people, they need to provide, I guess, to go all full circle to this statistic, high-value work, right? Because if they don't, then that person is going to leave and go elsewhere. And of course, we've seen lots of people leave the profession. We've seen lots of people move around. And I think when people realize that the benefit of having a legal counsel in their organization is to solve extremely complex and hard questions, and to ensure that the business is fully enabled to operate within the boundaries of the law, and not someone who just solves quite a lot of low value problems when someone happens to think about it, then actually that creates a much more fulfilling working life for a lawyer. And that, I think, is really where we're at. And I think, the two schools of thought in legal tech are, do we need a Tesla right now? Do we need a self-driving car, or do we just need a Toyota Prius hybrid, right? I think we're still in the Prius territory, where we can have some automation, we can have more high value work done by lawyers. And I think that's a really positive thing.
No, definitely. Well, for me, the two things go absolutely perfectly together. I mean, the whole kind of thesis, pretty much everything I do is that, as you were saying, let's let lawyers be lawyers, and take away from them all this stuff, this admin that they were never meant to do in the first place, which has kind of bubbled up over the last few decades. And the reason why it's there, of course, is because private practice firms found a way of monetizing inefficiency through leverage and generating huge profits. And then, of course, in-house legal teams started to grow, and these were populated by people who came from the same universe, and so on and on. And of course, we're now starting to sort of crack that system, thank God, at last. To anyone watching this who hasn't started to really grapple with these issues, or is grappling and running into some brick walls, just a couple of pieces of advice. What would be a good way of addressing some of these problems to start with?
So I think, like, number one, I think, and everyone says this, but I think it's really hard to do it in practice, is talk to the internal clients within the business. So if you're an in-house lawyer, I think the most effective tech GCs we see are holding workshops with the stakeholders in the business that they serve and enable, to really understand deeply what the objectives are. I think that conversation can already surface a mismatch in the alignment and part of the cause as to why they're pinging you every 10 seconds, inverted commas, urgent requests. So I think having that dialogue is really important. I'd say two, I do think certain legal work needs to be productized. So maybe that's using the existing tools you have, Juro, Trello, Excel, it doesn't really matter, to ensure that you have proper workflow processes in place. That workflow will increase efficiency and therefore give your team more time on high value work. And the third is look to automation and look for the low hanging fruit. I mean, there's nothing less productive than having a year-long search for a contract management provider and then having a year-long deployment. What could you automate tomorrow? Could you automate self-serve NDAs in the business? Could you automate billing? Find some low-hanging fruit and just get it done. And I think these things will come together and ultimately lead to high value work for your team.
Thanks, Richard. Great advice. Good chatting to you as always. So thank you very much. And well, we'll see you very soon, I hope. Take care.
Nice to catch up. Thanks, Richard.